This conference will now be recorded.
Hello and welcome to the Central Coast Writers Conference webinar with Jonathan Maberry. Jonathan has been a part of the conference since I took over and even before then, but he's been an integral part of our success for years because he's kind, he's generous, and he's ultra creative. So this year, Jonathan's going to be teaching a master class, which I think we laid it out in the hotel room by the fire pit after a couple whiskeys last year. But it was something you said you always wanted to teach, which was like how to get from the very beginning of writing all the way through your publishing career. And so I'll let you explain more about that. Go ahead, Jonathan.
Thanks. It's great to be here, Terry. And I'm really looking forward to going back to Central Coast. It's one of my favorite conferences anywhere. Here's what this is going to be about. I love the publishing world. I actually love all parts of publishing, even the difficult parts of it. But there is a learning curve to falling in love with that process. And there's a lot of speed bumps that writers can hit along the way where they waste time trying to solve basic problems or understand the way in which things work. So we're actually going to start with, okay, you have a manuscript. Now what? We're going to cover, looking for an agent, cover the etiquette of dealing with agents and editors, revision strategies and how not to take it personally. We're going to talk about the whole submission process, not just you submitting to an agent, but the agent submitting to editors. And what that conversation is when an editor buys a book, is all excited about it, and then a week later you get a long email with all the things they want you to change before they actually publish it. How to deal with that, how to strategize it. We're going to talk about social media and how that plays into building a career. My career, for example, my first novel came out in 2006, right when social media was really starting to take hold, back in the MySpace and Friendster days, which set the Wayback Machine. And I used social media from the beginning as a way of building my career, because also shortly after that we had the economic downturn, which impacted not only all of publishing, but specifically the areas in which publishers put money into supporting the careers and doing marketing. So that it's left it up to us to do it, and social media was that utility. So we'll talk about that, how to set kind of a temperature for your personal brand on social media. How to maximize your time as a writer too, because people forget that when you sell a novel, it isn't like you send the novel in, your agent sells it, and then there's a montage of you sitting by a lake looking thoughtful, thinking of your next novel, and then going on tour and making millions. It doesn't actually happen that way. You actually have to do a lot of other work for that novel, copy edits and proofreads and maybe structural edits. You have promotion to do, the advertising copy to do. While you're also working on the next book in the contract, and most contracts are in fact multiple book. So you've got to manage all that time, and if you have a day job, you have to figure a way to work it into your day job. If you have a family, you have to negotiate, sometimes beg, threaten, or whatever, to get the time to do the work. And at the same time, maintaining your enthusiasm and driving your career forward. So the first day of that masterclass is really going to be about taking it from the original idea, the original book, all the way through to the point where you're ready to, you're now dealing with the agents, dealing with the editors, and getting the thing out. Second half of it's going to be a bit more advanced. We're going to dive deep into what happens when you've got a book out there, you've got to do promo and everything for that. You've got another book that you're writing under contract. You're maybe pitching something else, or maybe you want to write in a different genre. You'll probably get asked to do short stories and other things as a novelist. How do you find time for that? What do you do if you want to be experimental and go different directions? Like, for example, I got into comic books. I also became a multi-genre author, started out in horror, went to thrillers, media tie-in, comic books, young adult, middle grade, science fiction, all over the place. How do you steer a career that's in motion so that you're constantly in the flow and not hitting any rocks along the way, and not grinding yourself up on the shore where your career can stall, which it can do? How do you not do that? Some great time management skills also for the more advanced writer, and just a bunch of other things. We're going to cover a lot. Now, I have my own agenda of what I want to cover in both parts of the program. But at the same time, I like to work with whoever's in the room to see what they need. So if you're coming with specific needs as a writer, you will actually get a chance to be heard, and that will change the dynamic of the way the program flows, because there's no value to me or to the people coming there if I'm just teaching a class that doesn't necessarily fit the people in the room. Like a writing career, a workshop like this has to be organic, has to adapt to the moment. And we're gonna have a lot of fun doing that. And there'll be for questions and so on. So we'll have a blast with this program. It's the kind of thing I've been looking forward to teaching, like in a one-day workshop for a long time. Usually have to take bits and pieces of it and parse it out. So I'm going to have fun, and I think you guys are going to have a lot of fun too.
Yeah, there is no Jonathan without fun. You two go together.
Well, professional goofball as well as a writer, so it kind of helps.
So do you think that someone who hasn't even begun their writing career will get a benefit out of this class?
Absolutely, especially the first part of it, although I think the whole thing would be really useful because it sets your expectations for what's down the road. In the early part of the workshop, we're going to talk about the process of developing an idea into a workable story, because a lot of us come up with these great ideas like, what happens if? But that's not actually a story. Where's the story part of that? How do you develop that story? How do you refine it into something that is not only doable for you based on your skill set, but how to up your game, up your skill set, and also find a viable commercial market for that. And that's absolutely built into the early parts of the workshop. If you come in there, honestly, if you come up with an idea that morning and come into the workshop, by the end of the day, you'll have a pretty solid game plan that'll take you all the way through to that book being on a shelf.
Okay, I have a question. So I was driving back from Palm Springs late at night, and you're trying to stay awake, and I'm looking, and I noticed that those call boxes, on the freeway when it's remote, there's exactly every mile. First of all, I made sure they were exactly every mile. They have those call boxes. So I thought, wouldn't it be a great horror story, like a dystopian time where the only communication left is those call boxes on the side of the road, and a group of people are getting to the call boxes, and every time they get there, something goes wrong?
Well, things always have to go wrong. We're not in the business of writing about happy people having a good day, but that's a great idea, because it sets up not only an unfolding mystery, like why are those things still there, but there's a kind of a bittersweet element to it. Like maybe you're reaching out to someone that you've lost, or someone that you've lost touch with. It can be creepy as hell, because you never know who's going to answer that call. I mean, there's so many different ways you can go with it, and each way takes you along a different road, different side road from the original idea. Actually, it's funny, because that brings to mind something that happened a few years ago. I was on a panel at, I think it was Nikon in New England, and Christopher Golden and I were on the panel with a couple other writers, and somebody from the audience had said, well, we were talking about zombies, but somebody said, well, isn't there nothing new to say about zombies? And I laughed, and so did Chris Golden, because you can take one idea, no matter what it is, and have an infinite number of variations on it. So what happened is, I, as a kind of an offhand comment to the person there, I said, you can take any idea, right, any idea, and then you can give it to 4 writers, and then they'll write 4 completely different stories. And I noticed that as I'm saying this, Chris Golden is over there typing something on his phone. He's sending a text. By the end of the panel, he said, oh, by the way, my agent wants to represent that book. I'm like, what? His agent to take the same setup and give it to multiple writers. And so we wound up doing that. We got Kelly Armstrong, who's a brilliant, award-winning writer, and David Liss, who is not only known for his really nuanced historical mysteries, but also for writing horror and comics. And the 4 of us took the same setup and wrote completely different stories. So you're thinking about the call boxes along the road. Not only could you have multiple writers writing a lot of different versions of that story, the story itself, as you write it, could have different variations with each call box and each call made and each call answered. that's part of the fun of storytelling. When I was a kid, I got to know Ray Bradbury, Richard Matheson pretty well, and they taught me the what if game, to take anything and then start asking questions about it, looking for obviously strange elements, because they wrote science fiction, fantasy, and horror. But you can do it with any genre, where you just start looking at anything. In that particular incident, there was a couple of pigeons on a windowsill outside where we were having this event, and two of the pigeons were looking out, and one was looking in. And so they started by asking, what's different about those pigeons? And then once I identified one looking in, they started saying, well, why is that pigeon looking in? They kept making me go deeper and deeper and deeper, following a what if kind of logic. And at the end of it, I went up with a pretty creepy story. So you can take that callbox thing, and by the way, I love that idea.
Thank you.
You could do some pretty creepy stuff with it.
I know. I was like, I want to write a horror film, but I can't read that stuff. I can't watch that stuff. So I need someone else to help me with the scary part.
Yeah. You need a creepy gunslinger to come in and do that for you. But yeah, that's one of the fun things. Sometimes we do have ideas that aren't really for us as a writer. I have an idea I would love to write. It's a literary novel about a writer's retreat. I have a title, I have an outline, I have the story, but my agent's like, I don't really want to sell that one for you. I'd rather sell something that's going to make 9 times the money. If you're going to invest time to write it, I could sell a book that would be half your income for the year, or I could sell that, which would be pocket change. And I'm like, but. So one of the problems is sometimes we have ideas that are outside our genre, and sometimes we have too many ideas for the amount of time we have to write. That's right. The most common problem for writing. And that's another thing we'll talk about in the workshop, because a lot of times people will come with multiple ideas and want to know, which one should I write? So there's a way of drilling down to determine, well, of those ideas, which one would be the most fun, which one has the best commercial viability, and most importantly, which one can you write with the most insight and passion. So we'll explore that process and how to pick those ideas, and what to do with the ideas that are constantly pulling on your coat saying, hey, listen to me. We all get them. Sometimes we write them down and come back to them later. My novel Glimpse, which came out last year, has elements of stories that have been around in my head for 25, actually 35 years. Finally the right story came along, and all those elements coalesced into a story. So just because you can't write an idea right away doesn't mean it doesn't have value, somewhere down the road.
So if someone has finished a book and is starting that process of trying to find a home for it, or an agent or a publisher, they can get a lot of this class too?
Oh yeah, there's tons of resources for how to identify the type of agent to look for. And there are a lot of ways that look good, but really waste a whole bunch of your time. I am not a fan of time wasting for writers. Time literally is money for writers. If we're wasting time trying to find an agent, that's time we could be using to write our next work. So we'll talk about practical business-centric shortcuts to find, to make a targeted list of the right kind of agents, how to identify those agents, how to check their track records, how to approach them, how to work with their submission guidelines, and so on. And kind of get the ball rolling. So yeah, we'll definitely be working with a lot of that.
So you're going to be doing anything on self-publishing, or all to the publishing process?
My primary focus is publishing process. I'd love seeing writers get paid up front. That said, probably 80% of the information that we talk about also applies to indie publishing if it's done right. There are a lot of really great indie published books out there, and also these micro presses that kind of straddle the line between indie publishing and small press. A lot of this will apply to them as well, because publishing is publishing in a lot of ways. There are a lot of ways in which this is really common ground. That's why I don't like the occasional knife fights that you see between conventional indie published writers. We're all writers. We're all trying to get our words out there, and we're all trying to do it in a way that, speaks from our best art, but also respects the reader. And that there should be no distinction between those two poles in indie or conventional. So yeah, there'll be a lot to say for indie writers. And just as I do with the writers' coffee houses that I host around the country, we don't separate indie from conventional. Writers are writers. So if you're writing, come and join the conversation with us.
So last year you did the fight scenes and you had everybody bring some article from their house that you turned into a weapon. What are you going to do? I'm putting you under the gun now. What are you going to do something like that for this class?
Well, it'll be a lot less violent for one thing. Actually, it's a good idea if people come with a couple things. One, they should come with a one paragraph description of the book, which is one of the hardest things for people to write because most people have no idea how to consolidate their book or condense it down to a paragraph. So come with that, and come with a goal for where they want it to appear, whether they want it as something that goes to mainstream or a different genre, whether it's something that is indie published, whether it's something that they think could be an audio book instead of a prose thing, a target. So just so that we can give them a starting point for the approach. Often we will vary from that or expand rather from that so that we see there's more than one way to do it. For example, I had a story for years that I wanted to do, a science fiction story, and recently Audible has approached me about doing it as an Audible original. I had thought about doing it as a full-blown novel, and I'm probably going to wind up doing as a series of related or connected novellas, not quite serialized, but connected as audio originals. That's still publishing. So we'll look into the other ways of doing it. But as far as other things they can bring, we're probably not going to do page critiques, but if they have a sample query letter, they should bring that. I'd like to see what they consider to be their business approach materials, because that first approach, that first contact, which is the query letter, that's the first impression. For indie publishers, I'd like to see what maybe their marketing plan is. If actually for anyone who's coming, if they have a marketing plan or a social media plan, bring that along. Let's talk about it. Let's see if we can refine that too. There's no element of the publishing process that's not fair game for the discussion in this masterclass.
Awesome. So,
we have plane by again.
I just had a chicken walk by, so I'll take your plane and I'll give you a chicken.
All right. Plane's a little louder, but chickens are cuter.
And she gives me eggs. Anyway, so if you have been a master at taking your novels and turning them for screen stuff. You're going to do another class on that. So talk a little bit about what's the magic there?
Well,
write a good book.
Write a good book, but there's even some ways of tweaking that model too. There's a point in my career where I guess around novel 5 or 6, and by the way, I'm writing number 36 now, so my process has changed over the years. But back around number 5 or 6, I started storyboarding my novels, laying them out the way I would lay out a movie. Like what are the obvious 3 cinematic acts? Where are the big dramatic set pieces, and so on. And the more I did that, the more easier it was for me to construct the story so that it has a much more visual appeal. I mean, you're still reading a prose, but you're able to see it a little more. And that seems to have attracted the eye of some people in Hollywood because it makes a little more sense to them visually. I also learned a lot from having written quite a few comics. I wrote for Marvel and IDW, Dark Horse. So that part of it is the visual, making sure that your book has a visual presentation, a visual possibility. Second, quite frankly, is not being a jackass or a prima donna. It's amazing how far you can get in business by being easy to work with. Yes, you need to be professional. Yes, you need to be good at both your craft and the business part, but you also need to be easy to get along with. The Hollywood stereotype of the prima donna, the person who thinks, if you take my novel, you must put every word of dialogue on the screen. You can't change a thing. Well, that's absurd. You can't take a novel and put it on a movie or a TV screen and leave it absolutely intact. You can't. They're different mediums. They're different lengths. There's there's something called a line producer. For example, with V-Wars, which is the show I have coming up for Netflix. If a line producer were to go through that book and budget out how much each episode would cost to do it exactly as I wrote it, it would be about $20 million an episode, because a lot of big stuff happens and there's a huge cast of characters. That's not doable. I mean, even Game of Thrones, as big a cast as it had, still left a lot of stuff out because there's just simply so many plot lines and so many characters in the books. They simply couldn't do it. So there has to be necessary changes for an adaptation. You have to be okay with that. Now, at the same time, if you're more agreeable, they tend to invite you into more of the discussions, which gives you a little more say. Recently, for example, when V-Wars was first purchased, I was not an executive producer, which means I didn't have any say over content. I became very interactive with the people who were making V-Wars, both the production side of it, Netflix, Hyde Park, and IDW Media, but also the actors involved in it, the showrunners, the screenwriters, and all. I became very involved with them, very open to conversations with them, to the point where they would start asking me questions that they're not contractually required to ask me. As a result, now I was made into an executive producer on the show. So now I actually have say. And I think a lot of it has to do with they're not afraid of having a conversation with me. And as a result, they want more conversations. And one of the other side effects, the same company that I wrote the original V-Wars material for, I had come up with a new comic book called Pandemica. I was up in LA at a meeting a couple of weeks ago, and they said, well, we'd love your concept for Pandemica. Can you just, pitch it to the other people in the room? And I gave a quick pitch, and they said, well, can you give us some material so we can start shopping this? And I was like, I just turned in the first issue script yesterday. And they're like, yeah, but we like the idea, we want to shop it. So being agreeable, being open, and being willing to work with them made them enthusiastic about taking my next thing, and they're going to go out shopping with a comic I'm still actively writing. So part of it is the personality you bring to it, the way in which you work within the industry, but also how savvy you become on it, because it is a different industry with different rules, different dictionary for how people speak to one another. Learn it. Go learn how it works. I started reading Variety and Hollywood Reporter long before I had my first option, because I wanted to understand how the business worked. And when they know that you have some interest in actually understanding how the business works, they're a lot more interested in getting you into the business.
So are you ever going to just write a script, ever just write a movie?
Mm-hmm. Probably TV first. We're already talking about me possibly writing an episode of V-Wars should we get picked up for a second season. I've got another show, unfortunately I can't tell you the name of it yet, it's still under wraps, that's about to be pitched to Sci-Fi Channel, and I'm executive producer on that as well. So there's a possibility I would get to write an episode or two of that. And a couple other things. In fact, Friday I'm going up to LA again to have a meeting with another group about who's on a fishing expedition to see, what I might have, and hopefully I'd be able to write something for them as well. I definitely want to write for Hollywood. I don't want to stop writing novels, though. I'm a novelist. Novels are what I love to do. But yeah, I want to start adding TV and movie script writing to my list of fun things to do for my career. Because, for example, when I started doing comic book scripts are very similar to TV scripts. I didn't know the format when I started in terms of what the script looked like. Now, I've done hundreds of issues of comics. I love comics. So I got a feeling I'm going to fall in love with TV as well.
So when you write a comic book, do you get the art first, or does the story come first?
Now, the old thing about getting the art first was back in the original, they called it the Marvel method back in the 60s, where they would have a story conference, Jack Kirby or Steve Ditko would go out and draft out 20 pages of comics, and then Stan Lee would go in and write the dialogue. That ship sailed. Now it starts with, you pitch a story, and it's very much like a book pitch. The editor has you break it down into however many issues they've allotted, anywhere from 3 to 6 issues. Most comics are told in 3 to 6 issue arcs. 4 to 5 is most common, because those are then collected into what's called a trade. I'll give you an example. This is a trade. See, this is my Rotten Ruin comic I did some years ago, and what they do is they, after the issue runs, all the floppies, the individual issues, it's collected into this. And so anyway, after your outline is approved, you write scripts. And the scripts include art direction. It actually tells the artist what to draw. And sometimes that includes putting URLs in there so they can see a very specific image. Like if there's an angle of a city that you specifically want, you need to put a lot of art direction in there, because one of the things is most of the artists I've worked with are not from America. I've worked with artists in Chile, Croatia, Scotland, Ireland, all over the place, Asia, different parts of Asia. So they may not have the same visual references, so the URLs help. At the same time, once the script is read by the artist and the editor will come back with suggestions for how that art direction may be tweaked, because the artist will have often a slightly different and often better idea of how to visually present that panel. And because you decide how many panels are in each page. And it's an unwise writer who doesn't listen to the artist, because their job is visual storytelling. Sometimes a simple change in what goes into that panel can tell twice as much story as you can through either captions or character dialogue. So it becomes a collaboration. Often the colorist and the letterer have a lot of creative input. So it's very much a team effort. I kind of feel like working within comics has been part of my training to then work with Hollywood, because it's no longer me in a room alone with my laptop. It's me and then more and more people involved, so it becomes an us thing.
Very cool. So tell us about your writing day.
Well, I'm a full-time professional writer, so my job is writing. So I usually am at it by 9 o'clock in the morning. Most often, my work days when I'm not traveling is pretty standard. I usually go somewhere in the morning to write. I like the idea of going to work, even though I have a beautiful office. I'm actually sitting in my office right now looking at the Pacific. But I actually like the idea of going out to work. So I usually go to one of the restaurants where they know me. They know me well enough to know what I do, so that when I come in, they'll just immediately I get the same thing every day. So they immediately put my order in, and we'll come over and keep filling my coffee cup and leave me alone. If there's a plug, if there's an outlet, I will write for 4 hours there. If not, I'll write till my laptop battery dies, and then probably go to a Panera's or a Starbucks. Then usually in the afternoons, I come home to my home office and do another 4 hours. So it works out to about 8 hours of writing a day, shakes out to 4,000 words on average. Now,
A day?
Yeah. Now, if it was just typing, 4,000 words is not a big thing, because secretaries can type 10 times that. But it's writing, it's thinking about it, it's doing spot research. But yeah, I do about 4,000 words a day, which amounts to just about half to 3/4 words a year for publication. I am a very high output writer. I don't recommend high output for everyone. There are people I know who are faster than me, and I'm working on catching up. But I write, I'm working on my third novel this year, and I have at least one more I'm going to write this year. I have two 30,000 word novellas I'll write this year, writing 5 issues of comic books, possibly 7 this year, and about 10 short stories. So, it's my job. The other part of the job is like some days I'll have so many business emails, because I'm on California time and publishing is on New York time. So by the time I get up, they've had 3 hours to load my email box with a bunch of stuff. You have to do it. Conversations with my literary agent, sometimes with my film agent, with various editors. Sometimes you get materials in that have to be copy edited, or they'll want you to write jacket copy for your next book. I just did that with for my next book, Rage. I had to give them jacket copy. Sometimes you're doing interviews. Like a lot of the interviews I do are email interviews, where I'll get a list of questions. You got to do those as well. So you got to fit that into your workday. Business calls got to get fit into the workday, and also the convention circuit. I do a lot of conferences and conventions. I like being out there. I like teaching. I like socializing with my colleagues. It's another one of the reasons I like Central Coast, because there's a lot of opportunities for us to hang and talk and really get to know each other. Not only talking shop, but just talking to writer's life, And also, like, I'm coming up with the Dragon Con, which is in Atlanta. That's 4 days weekend where I will be writing, or I'll be doing at least 4 panels a day plus book signings every day. And so I've got to do those and find time to do a little networking, maybe some business meetings between things, and find some writing time as well, because the books still have to get written even if I'm on tour. So all of that is part of the writing day. And you have to really develop good time management skills, which is one of the reasons I'm folding so much of that into the master class. And I talk about it in a lot of my classes, because time management skills are the way in which writers become productive. And if you're not productive, you get pressured and you start feeling stressed, and stress does not help. So.
Right. So when you write your first draft, is it an ugly first draft, or do you edit as you go?
I'm not sure it's good enough to be an ugly first draft. Hideous, oh my God, what is that thing draft? Is a little close to it. I don't even try to get my grammar and spelling right. I'm a product of the Philadelphia public school system, so my grammar is questionable at best. My spelling, if it wasn't for spell check, people would think I just had an aneurysm. And also, my first drafts tend to be a tad bloated, like the novel, which is coming out in November. The draft I sent in for that was about 170,000 words. It needed to be 140,000 words. So that's 30,000 words of stuff that even though I had an outline and I knew exactly where I was going, it still got big, because there's always organic stuff that happens during the writing process. So my first draft is basically Jabba the Hutt in terms of effectiveness and body size. And then I have to go in and trim it down and make it the kind of book that both my editor and I would like to see on the bookshelf. Now, what's changed in that process is my first novel took me 3.5 years to write and about 16 or 18 revisions. Now I do a first draft, I do a quick polish, goes off to my editor. The editor will give me notes. Sometimes there are tears on the page because of how bad a first draft it is. I will go through and then do my true second draft, and I will put a lot into that. And I do it in waves. I do like different elements of craft in different waves, and then I slim it down. It goes back off. If there's time allowing, I'll allow my assistant to, I'll have my assistant go through it, because she has a sharp eye. Dana Fredstein, she's my assistant, really, really brilliant young woman. She has a sharp eye, and she's a writer herself. So she can go through and see things that I may be too close to be objective on. She'll find it. That'll clean it up as well. And then after that, I go on to the next book, and that's the process.
Wow, it's impressive. So if there's like, if there's one, I know it's impossible, but one little nugget of advice that you'd give somebody who's like kind of struggling out there that just won't sit down and do it, what would you say it would be?
It's tough to make someone, give someone advice that's going to put their butt in a chair. The closest would be to only write the stuff that's fun. So if they're laboring on a novel and they've lost their passion for it, there are a couple tricks to refine the passion, like go ahead and write the ending, or go write the fun scenes. Like if you're bogged down, go write a fight scene, a sex scene, a comedy scene, or something, just kind of to write something more entertaining for you as both writer and reader. I like writing the ending first. If I know the ending, it tends to get me back in gear to move the whole thing forward. And also, you got to talk to other writers. If you're losing your mojo, a lot of times it's because you're not talking to enough other writers. And I'm not talking about peer critique groups. I'm talking about socializing, networking, social media, whatever. Just talk to other writers, because a lot of them are going through, probably all of them are going through what you're going through, or they have gone through it. And you want to talk to them. You want to see how they got through that moment, and maybe you'll have something you can share with them. We all get this, by the way, every one of us. I have a lot of my top pro New York Times bestseller friends who, every once in a while I'll get an email from them saying, well, I'm halfway through the book and this is a bloated piece of crap, and this is the one that's going to sink my career, and I should go dig ditches for a living because clearly I can't write. And I'm talking about from guys who are #1 New York Times bestsellers. And I've sent those emails myself, by the way. So we all go through it, and we get imposter syndrome too. Like, what possible reason could I have to justify writing a book? I've actually been on panels for the imposter syndrome, by the way, where you'll have a whole bunch of New York Times bestsellers. Like I was on one with a guy who has 130 novels out, 130. He's had #1 international bestsellers, still gets the imposter syndrome every book. So we're talking about that. It never quite goes away, but there are tricks to rebuild enthusiasm. Talking to other writers does a world of good. Talking to people on social media about your writing process, helping them or getting them to help you kind of reclaim your mojo. Often talking to the people on social media about the nonfiction elements of your book. Like, for example, if you're writing a weird science thriller, talk about that aspect of science, and you'll find science geeks out there who are so enthusiastic about the topic, they'll have a great conversation. That helps. Also, the more you study both the business of writing, always important, but the elements of craft, the more you find that you have control over what you write. And the more control you are aware that you have, the more fun it is to go in and manipulate that story. When you don't know how the actual structure of writing works, it's very hard to feel that you're in command of things. And it's very easy to say, I just can't. It's too much effort to even put a paragraph together. But if you understand those elements of craft, well, then you're going and you're playing with a really cool toy. And you want to play with that toy. And, so those are things that I think might help someone who's maybe lost a little bit of their fire.
So do you outline every book before you start?
I'm an outliner. Now, I am not the kind of, there's different types of outliners, by the way. So there's some outliners who write a really elaborate outline where it looks like, at a glance, it looks like prose. I mean, because it's whole paragraphs and so on. They fill in all the details. It reads very much like a synopsis of a finished novel. That's not me. I'm a bullet point guy. Good old-fashioned bullet pointed outline. Like chapter 1 might be, Joe Ledger being dragged into an interrogation room in Syria. That might be my entire outline for chapter 1. I know what's going to happen in that, but if I over-explain it to myself in the outline, it doesn't allow me to have wiggle room if the scene develops in a way that I don't expect, and often scenes will. Good example. If you're a gardener and you build a trellis for roses, right? You know that at the end of the process, the trellis will be built and there'll be roses all over it. That's your outline. How the roses grow and what you do as they're growing in unexpected directions is the organic process of writing. The two have to exist together or you're going to force it to fit. Books are not bonsai trees. You can't keep painfully pruning them. You've got to allow them to grow a little bit on their own and to surprise you in the directions they take. That's what happens with my outlines. Good example, in my novel Rotten Ruin, I had a character, Nix Riley, who was only in my outline in one scene. She was just this girl that the main character liked from his hometown, but wasn't going to fall in love with because they grew up together and they were just buds. In the scene where she and that character are talking, by writing the dialogue, the character became more interesting, more complex. So I said, okay, I'm going to put her in another scene, and then another. And then eventually I went back to my outline and rebuilt the outline so that she was actually the co-star of the entire series, because I realized that's the potential. It changed even who the love interest of the series was going to be, because she became the more interesting person for the main character to be involved with, much more interesting. That happened because of the organic process that happened within the structure of my outline.
So do you create the characters first and then the outline? Do you know who these guys are going to be, your main ones?
Bit of both. I often have a couple of central characters first, and then it builds. Like I'm writing the novel Ink right now, which is a standalone horror novel about somebody who steals the tattoos that are tied to our most precious memories. So the two characters I had when I started it were this character named Monk and this character named Patty, who I used as supporting characters in another book. I wanted to build an entire novel around them. So when I started outlining the book, it was them. But as soon as I decided where I was setting the book and the world in which I was setting it, I moved it from kind of like the seedier section of Manhattan to a fringe neighborhood in a small town in rural Pennsylvania, it changed the dynamic of which characters are likely to be there. And I started doing research. And also, as I'm writing the outlines, I'm doing research. Since it deals with tattoos, I'm doing hundreds of interviews with people in the tattoo culture, people with tattoos and tattoo artists. I decided I wanted to explore the dynamic of the way in which relationships are changing. It isn't the standard boy-girl thing that we thought relationships were. There's so many different versions of it, polyamory and all these different versions. Started interviewing people about that. Started interviewing people in the LGBTQ community because I wanted to explore that dynamic within the structure of the story. And the more I did research, the more it made me want to change the outline. So the outline, I had a rough outline with just those two characters and the villain. And by doing a little research and being open to change within it, to the opportunities afforded by knowing more about the cultures, I was able to come up with a pretty fun cast of characters that I'm really enjoying writing. And some of them surprised the heck out of me. And a lot of times characters come directly out of the research. Like when I was doing research on tattoos, some of the experiences people would share with me about why they got tattoos and how the meanings changed over the years totally created new characters in my head. And I think some of those characters are going to be the most vivid because they're drawn from real life experiences and real life, serious traumatic experiences that the people I interviewed with were kind enough and brave enough to share very frankly with me. And that allowed me to build characters that I think will make a compelling novel. So it is both outline and characters kind of neck and neck until it's all one thing moving together.
Got it. So you write all scary stuff. Do you dream your characters? Are they in your dreams?
Well, before I answer that, I don't write all scary stuff.
Then send me one that's not scary.
Mars is not that scary. It's, there's a little element of like one terrorist subplot, but most of it it's science fiction, straight science fiction. And I did a story called Cobbler of Oz, which I'm about to adapt into a comic, about a little winged monkey girl who's looking for magic traveling shoes because her wings too small to fly. So that's a charming little story about, set in the world of the Wizard of Oz. Not everything I write is scary.
Okay.
I do write a lot of scary stuff though, so not a completely unfair statement you made. So I forget, what was the question?
The question was, I just imagine you waking up with nightmares every night because there's zombies and vampires in your head.
There's actually a fun story about that. Years ago, when I was studying martial arts, when I first started studying martial arts as a little kid, the wife of my instructor taught us, she was very much into a couple different forms of yoga and very much into meditation. So she taught us a couple of different meditative exercises, one of which was a guided meditation where we'd sit there and she would tell us, like, add elements, like we'd be on a beach, and she'd start adding elements of all five senses until we actually felt ourselves on the beach. And then we'd start to do that as we went to bed at night, bringing in the five senses of some scenarios so that we were fully there, and do it as we're falling asleep over a period of years. It's not something that happened quickly. I began dreaming about those things that I would be thinking about as I was drifting off. And eventually I was actually able to kind of program myself so that, for example, if I have a difficult chapter I can't figure out the plot for, I'll think about that as I'm going off to sleep and kind of do my meditative breathing as I'm going off to sleep. And I will actually dream about that and often dream my way through it. But when I just let dreams happen the way they happen, because of that very rich meditative focus on the five senses, my dreams are very vivid, very detailed, and they are stories. When I was a kid, I would dream sequentially. In fact, I did 2 middle grade novels, Orphan Army and Vault of Shadows, that were based on my dream diary from when I was 11. And they were scary. Aliens invading Earth, and human and supernatural kids fighting back against aliens because all the adults were dead. But nowadays, I'll have pretty bizarre dreams. Even if they're scary, I've spent so much time over the years taking control of my dreams. Like usually when I wake up in the morning, I'll lay there and remember my dreams. And if it's good stuff, I'll write down notes or get my iPad out and write something real quickly, so that my dreams, even if they're scary, aren't disturbing to me. they're offering me stories to tell. And I love my dreams. I absolutely love my dreams. A lot of stuff in my novels came from dreams. The one that is probably most completely based on dreams is my novel Glimpse, which is also my favorite novel I've ever written. Almost every single scene in there came out of one or another dream that I had, some years ago, and I just brought them together into one story. But I've had scary monster dreams and woke up and was like, wow, that's cool. Let me go write that. I'll jot down.
That's awesome. Okay, so I have a question for you, but I'm going to lead it with an anecdote. So Bridget and I were sitting in a bar getting ready to do a keynote because I have to drink before these things. And of course you do. And so it was just Bridget and I at the bar, and there's one single lady. And she just starts talking to us, which is normal when there's only 3 people at the bar. But I found her so fascinating as a character. I did not interrupt this woman once. If I could have, I would have taken my phone and started videoing her, but I couldn't because she was crazy. But and afterwards I was just like, and Bridget's like, I've never heard you quiet for that long. I'm like, she's the perfect character, full on nuts. So the question was, is it when you're out in the coffee shops, do you look around and find characters, or you just put your head down and write?
Oh, no. I'm a professional eavesdropper. So I listen to conversations. Sometimes you don't really mean to, or am I lying about that? I actually sometimes just listen to people talk, partly because I want to pick up vocal tics, unique vocal patterns. But sometimes they're just talking about something that's very interesting. It may not be something that I might want to engage in the conversation about, but it's something characters might talk about in a book. And also, I travel a lot. Airports are great for meeting people. Bars at conventions, great for meeting people and having the conversations. And writers, I was trained as a journalist, not a novelist. So, journalists are trained to listen. If you're an interviewer, you're trained to listen. So, as you did there, I shut up and listen, and often walk away saying, "Wow, that person is so going in my book." There are, in fact, a lot of characters in my novel that are real people. Some are just names from people who won contests, but quite a few characters in my books are actually based on the personalities of real people. Most of those people know about it. Few do not. You should.
Yeah, every now and then someone say, that character seems an awful lot like me. I'm like, no, that couldn't possibly be. You've been coming to this conference for at least 6-7 years that I know of. And you're always quick to say yes. What do you find the best about the Central Coast Writers Conference?
There's a bunch of things. First off, it's in one of the most beautiful places on planet Earth. I mean, Cuesta College, Morro Bay, the whole area is just insanely beautiful. But from the conference itself, from the very beginning, it was actually where I did my very first keynote speech ever. And I've done a lot since then, but the very first one I ever did was at Central Coast. But the thing about the folks there, even though it's some new people and some old people, previous attendees and faculty, there is a family feel to it. Everyone feels like they've known each other for a long time. Conversations start like that. There isn't any of the standoffishness that you can see at some events I won't name. There isn't the pretentiousness that I've seen sometimes. In fact, just the opposite. People that go there earnestly wanting to teach and earnestly wanting to learn, and everyone earnestly wanting to share. It hits that rare mark of being a conference for everyone. Conventionally published, independently published, nonfiction and fiction, poet, prose, pretty much everyone can go there and learn something. Even as a faculty member and as a successful writer, I've never walked away from there without knowing something that I didn't know when I got there. And that's a pretty rare thing. It's a wonderful thing. It's also a hell of a lot of fun. I don't think I've ever been to a conference where people laugh as much as they do there. There are a couple of regular players among the faculty and the conferees who are funny as hell. And also some people who just show up and they get into the vibe of it, and suddenly they go from being, I'm a nervous newbie to, hey, I got a great story to tell, and then we're all laughing. So it has that family feel. It has the kind of family feel you want to go to a Thanksgiving dinner with, not the kind of family feel where, oh my God, it's going to be another knife fight over turkey. It really has a great feel to it. The subject matter of the classes change a lot, which is a great opportunity for faculty as well as conferees. And also, this is a weird thing, but there's a better species of question asked at these conferences. Often when you're doing workshops, you up the questions at a certain point and you start getting the same questions every workshop. And at Central Coast, I don't know what it is in the water, but people seem to ask not that question, not even the next question, but the next question. It's a deeper question that sparks a much better conversation with everyone there. So there's a lot of reasons I love Central Coast. There are very few events that I do enthusiastically every year. This is one that I love doing every year, and I would go to even if I wasn't a faculty member. I would probably have gone to it as a conferee earlier in my career.
That's awesome. We can always have you drive a cart, right?
That works for me. Mind you, they will get lost and probably start in the wilderness, but yeah, I'll drive a cart around, sure.
And then we can make a horror story out of it, right?
I'm probably already writing that in my head right now, come to think of it.
All right, so thank you everybody for being here, and thank you, Jonathan. We wanted to let you know that everybody that's on the call, if you haven't registered for Jonathan's masterclass, you get 20% off for being on this call. So we have your names here. So you would just email me at centralcoastwritersconference@gmail.com, and then we'll get you the 20% off. Your class is getting pretty full. The cool thing about the master classes is they only take 20 people, so it's very intimate and small, and you get to spend a lot of time with to jump inside Jonathan Maberry's head for 6 hours is something I dream of. And eventually I won't run the contest or conference, I'll get to just do it. But I think he's one of our best and brightest teachers, and it's a gift that he keeps giving to share his mastery of novels and everything else with us.
I slipped her to say that, and by the way, you read it exactly the way I dictated. That was great. Thanks.
I don't even have your paper here. I'm just a fan. I always have been. So does anybody have any questions for Jonathan before we just type them in the notes, and then I will ask him, and if not, we will let him get back to writing. You seem to be on social media a lot, but you said you go like, what, 10 minutes in there?
Yeah, 10 minutes out of every hour of social media. And
that's amazing. And you don't get sucked down the hole?
I don't, because I know that at the end of that 10 minutes, either my phone alarm or my Alexa app is going to yell at me to get back to work.
Wow. I'm a professional poker now on Facebook. There's all these groups that are just, all they want to do is argue with everybody. So I go in and I throw up a comment that makes everybody go crazy, and I sat and watch, and I just enjoy the hell out of it.
You're a provocateur.
I am. Gary's like, you really gonna do that? I'm like, yeah, I kind of enjoy it. But yeah, whatever. So 10 minutes a day, just during your writing hours.
Well, and while I'm watching TV, I'll go on. Like if I start a conversation that day, I'll go on and look at some of the comments and hit like and make a reply or whatever, or see what my friends are posting. So I maybe want a little too often as the day wears on, but during my work day, I do budget the time.
So what's TV show are you binging on right now?
Oh, I just finished The Boys on.
Oh my God, I love that so much.
I love the original comic, and Craig Robinson is one of the screenwriters. He and I did some panels together at Comic-Con, and man, he sold me on the show, and I watched it and absolutely loved it. And the guy who plays Homelander, who's the villain, is also the guy who started Banshee, which is one of my favorite shows. And that because of that, I'm now binge watching on Banshee again. My other
he's so creepy.
Yeah, but he's a really good guy in Banshee. He's, but I'm also, my wife and I binge watch on some reality shows. We love $1 Million Listing, Songland, So You Think You Can Dance, things like that. So a little bit of everything.
You should turn one of those reality shows into a horror.
Actually, it was done. They did a really brilliant zombie show called Dead Set, where the entire thing takes place in the British set of Big Brother. It's brilliant, absolutely brilliant. Scary, funny, outrageous, and there's no way to top it. It was so good, so I'm going to leave that one as having been done and done well.
What's it called? British?
Dead Set.
Ah,
Dead Set.
okay.
I think 5 episodes they did.
All right. So one of the questions was, what would you recommend for someone at the conference if they want to do a PCS with you? I'm not sure what she means by that. Like, what would they bring, or what would they ask? You're one of the most generous of private critique sessions. You always like, give me more. I've got an hour.
They want to bring, one of the problems with those, I mean, it's one of the challenges of those sessions is sometimes you have to read right there and then give advice, and there isn't a tremendous amount of time. My favorite thing to do is just answer the questions they need answered right away. So, yes, I'll read something and critique. Obviously, that's the structure. But if they come with a couple of questions, that's going to allow us to go a little deeper.
Okay.
And also, there's a lot of stuff on my website, on my jonathanmaberry.com website. Spell the last name correct, Maberry. On that web, on the website, there's a whole page called Free Stuff for Writers. Go there and look at the query letter, look on the notes on the 3-act structure, comic book script, download all that stuff, and because that may help you with the sort of help you refine some of what you're going to then bring to the PCSs at Central Coast.
Oh my God, I didn't know that was on your website. I'm going to go there and steal stuff.
I had my assistant put that up a little while ago, and we're getting a lot of hits on it. So
I bet.
Also, my buddy Chuck Wendig has a lot of free stuff on his website for writers too. Go hit that.
I love him. I tried to get him as a keynote, but that was the year his mom got sick.
Yeah, Chuck is one of the really true good guys out there. Fantastic writer. His new novel's killing it right now. So, yeah, Chuck's the man.
We'll have to get him back next year. All right. Well, thank you, Jonathan, and we will see you in September.
See you in September. Bye.
All right. Bye. Thank you, everybody.